Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Shaping the Future of Navigation with S-100. We're pleased to have you with us as we explore the next generation of navigation and specifically how S-100 will help shape maritime decision-making in the years ahead. This webinar builds on a series of sessions we've delivered at industry events, most recently at SeaAsia in Singapore. Today, we'll revisit some of the key topics of discussion raised during our panel discussion and share our latest thinking on the evolving S-100 landscape. I'm pleased to be joined by Tom Meller, who is Head of Technical Partnerships at the UK Hydrographic Office. Tom has been on the panel at previous events and webinars and is here today to offer his expertise based on his experience working with ECDIS manufacturers and involvement in various working groups at the International Hydrographic Organization. So in terms of how this webinar will run, we'll start with some planned questions based on the discussions we've had at previous events, which should take us through the first 30 minutes. After that, we'll open the floor for a live audience Q&A, where Tom and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have on S-100 or anything else discussed today. A bit of housekeeping for you on the tech side. If you can please submit any questions you may have at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon in the top toolbar of your screen. This will bring up a panel on the right-hand side where you can type your question in the Ask a Question box. Then, as the questions start to come in, it would really help us if you could upvote the ones that you'd like to see answered. And you can do that by clicking on the arrow under each question. And that gives us some priority order when we get to the Q&A section. You will notice that there is an option to raise your hand, but we'd ask that you please submit all questions via the question box. So to kick things off, let's briefly explain what S-100 is, especially for those who may be new to the topic. S-100 is a new data framework being introduced by the International Hydrographic Organization, or IHO, in collaboration with hydrographic offices and organizations across the globe. And its aim is to modernize and enhance the way maritime data is shared and used. It builds on the solid foundations laid by S-57, which has been the standard for electronic navigational charts, or ENCs, since it was introduced back in 1992. But S-100 takes things a step further by providing a more flexible, future-proof standard for ENCs and supporting a much wider variety of data types, going beyond just navigational charts and hydrographic data. And one of the most exciting things about S-100 will be the ability to bring together these different data types into a single view for users, helping to inform a much wider range of decision-making. Now, the S-100 framework includes a variety of different standards. Today, we'll be focusing primarily on the Phase 1 product specifications, those that are closest to becoming operationally mature. This includes S-101 for next-generation ENCs, S-102 for bathymetric surface information, so depicting the seafloor, S-104 for water levels, and S-111 for surface currents. And together, these standards are set to deliver a far more comprehensive view of the marine environment. It's worth emphasizing at this stage that the transition towards S-100 will be a gradual one. There are some key timelines to be aware of, but we're still very much in the testing and development phase, and we'll talk about this in further detail today. This transition will take place over a number of years at a pace that fully considers industry needs. So, Tom, you've been closely involved in the development of these product specifications, which you spoke about during our previous panel discussion. What were your key takeaways from the conversations we had at SeaAsia?
Thanks, Guy, and hello to everyone joining us from the office and at home. I think for me, it was important to reconnect with our colleagues out in Asia and to also meet new customers. And they were really interested to hear about all of the developments with the S-100 ECDIS and all of the trials and testing that we're doing with those new data sets. And I've been involved in this now for a long period of time. I've worked for the UK Hydrographic Office for the last 23 years and been involved with the setting of standards for ENCs and ECDIS for the last 20 years. So a lot of experience all in the digital space. And for me, as someone who's moved from paper into first generation ENCs, it's now really exciting to see the transformation from digital to digital. And what S-100 will bring, hopefully, is a new set of data products that will meet the evolving needs of the users. And that's just a really exciting thing to be involved with.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, mariners and shipping companies, Tom, have access to more data than ever before, with increasing complexity and pressure in decision making. Our Chief Customer Officer, Eleanor Skelly, shared key changes in maritime landscape, the evolving user needs, and what that means for the future of navigation.
From a customer needs perspective, I think the thing that we see changing the most is the speed and the agility that customers now need. So if we think about some key trends in the shipping industry at the moment, we've got things like decarbonisation goals that people are working towards. We have things like greatly increased connectivity at sea, so lots of low Earth orbit satellites and organizations like OneWeb and Starlink providing that connectivity to people at sea. We also have expansion of things like port infrastructure and shipping routes changing. So there really are a number of things in the shipping industry at the moment that are changing at quite a pace. And so what we're seeing is that customer needs need to be met by more agile products and services, which S-100 absolutely forms part of that. The thing that I would say is that out of all of the things that are changing, we see customers still wanting safe products and services and compliant products and services.
Yeah, some really good points made by Eleanor there, Tom, and we're at a really pivotal moment in the industry with maritime connectivity, changing the way we act between ship and shore, and as Eleanor said, decarbonisation remains front and centre of a lot of people's minds. So it's no surprise that mariners are looking for more dynamic decision support. But how do you see S-100 supporting safer navigation decisions on the bridge and a better user experience?
So just picking up on Eleanor's comments really about the satellite connectivity, I see this as a really transformational development. It will allow us as hydrographic offices to start changing the way in which we deliver data to vessels. We'll be able to transfer more information than we've ever been able to before, and this will enable us to ensure that the safety of the vessel is maintained by being able to produce high-resolution bathymetric surfaces which can be sent to the vessel alongside all of that new tidal information, which should help to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information at all times. Now, this will obviously help with safety, but it would also help us to ensure that the vessel has the most up-to-date data to still remain compliant. So this technology is really going to help us. Now, one of the things that people have really had some concerns around is that by the introduction of lots of new products, will it cause a lot of complexity for the S-100 ECDIS? Will the mariner be overloaded with information as they transition from S-57 to S-101? And I think it's important to understand that whilst there will be some changes, they're not going to be huge and substantial and make very sweeping changes to the data format so that mariners would need to go through extensive retraining. A lot of the symbols will remain the same, but will have some enhancements. But one of the main differences that users may see is actually around text placement. Now, you should be able to see these images on the screen at the moment. We have an image from S-57 where Traditionally, there was no cartographic control that hydrographic offices could put into that data. And this meant that when the mariner was actually turning the text on in their E&Cs, it would sometimes overlap and cause a really complex and messy, cluttered picture on the screen for the users. So most of the time, the mariner would turn the text off. And this means that they don't have that information available. So if you're entering a new port and you're told by the VTS to go to berth 3, you have to then find the menu for text, turn that on, find out where berth 3 is. And this all takes time and really is not a good user experience. But with S-101, we have the ability now as hydrographic officers to put some intelligent text placement into those names. And what this will do is it will mean that the end users will have a picture that will be decluttered. We won't have text overwriting itself. Hopefully, we will have a very intuitive picture now where text can be on at all times, and that will help the user with their situational awareness. One of the other things that we've done to improve the usability of the S-101 E&Cs is to look at the buoyage and the point symbols. In S-57, we used to have two symbol sets. We had coloured simplified symbology and we had traditional buoyage. Now, the traditional buoyage was shapes that were based upon the paper chart, but they had no colour fill. But with the new S-101 symbology, we'll have coloured buoyage. And what this will do is it will enable the user, when they're looking out of the window and they see that cardinal mark and they look back at their E&C chart, they will see exactly the same image. They'll see that cardinal buoy shape, they'll see the black and yellow colour and know that they're in the right navigational space. So there's some subtle changes that will really help with that transition to S-101. The other thing to bear in mind is that we're not changing the colour palettes. So everything that they're used to seeing with their S-57 E&Cs will be very similar in their S-101 E&Cs. And S-101 is really the base layer, in actual fact, on which all of these other S-100 product specifications will be built. So it's really the foundation, and you need to have that in order to benefit from all of the S-100 products that we're bringing to market very soon.
Yeah, thanks, Si. It's great that there's such a focus on that user experience. I mean, the need for clarity and dynamic data was made clear during our time in Singapore, a global maritime gateway welcoming over 140,000 vessels per year. We were joined by Dr. Parry Wee, an advisor at the Maritime Port Authority and former chief hydrographer, and he spoke about the importance of precision and accuracy in the Singapore port environment. He shared a collaboration that was underway to improve the survey data ahead of S-100.
But you come to Singapore, let's say the port of Singapore, our underkeel clearance is only 1 meter. And why are we confident in allowing the 1 meter underkeel clearance? Because we, one, thoroughly survey the area to high accuracy on a regular basis. 2, we have long-term analysis of our tidal prediction as well. And on top of that, we build into allowance, taking the compensation, the total budget error. We spend close to 10 million to resurvey waters 30 meters and shallower over 600 kilometers. And the reason why we did that is to prepare for the next generation of the S-101 E&Cs.
I mean, it's really encouraging to see one of the world's largest ports getting ready for the rich picture that S-100 will provide. Tom, how could S-100 support greater navigational precision and efficiency in really complex port environments like Singapore?
So I think it's important to reflect on one of the points Parry made there around the data quality and the fact that to be able to produce the new data sets necessary for precision navigation, you need high quality survey information. That's why they've spent so much going out and resurveying areas with modern survey techniques. And we found that ourselves in our own testing and trialling of the S-102 bathymetric surfaces that we've done with the Port London Authority. We started off creating S-102 data based on all the different data, bathymetric data that we had at the UKHO, and this included single beam data, it included lead line information, it included all sorts of information. But when we created those bathymetric surfaces, occasionally there was holes in the data. And when that came to presenting that information on the screen for the end user, because the PPUs and the ECDIS systems can't interpolate that information, it left gaps and it caused a really significant portrayal issue, which clearly isn't right, and we needed to correct that. So one of the fundamental things that we've learned from this is that we cannot create S-102 data that has any gaps in coverage, and so we need that access to high quality survey information, traditionally multi-beam survey information, to create those S-102 products. And what this will do is really transform port operations. And you can see on the screen now we have a screenshot of an S-57 ENC alongside a screenshot from the data that we created for the PPU and the S-102 displayed there. In the ECDIS screenshot showing the S-57 ENC, you can see the large area that looks out of bounds because it's bounded by the black safety contour. And what this means is effectively, even though that vessel's put in its 7-meter safety contour, there isn't any 7-meter safety contour in the S-57 data. So it defaults to the safest contour that's available, and that happens to be the 10-meter contour. So according to the ECDIS, you cannot navigate through there safely. And if you did navigate through there, that would set off alarms on the bridge, which would have to be acknowledged by the master. And this, again, if you're navigating across there, it presents a really unsafe picture of what the end user would be doing. But when you look at how that data is unlocked when you use S-102, you can see that the 7-meter safety contour that the vessel put in actually means that that passage through the shallow area is perfectly safe, and they can transit through there with confidence. And this really became apparent when we were doing our trialing and testing with the pilots and the masters, is that actually having two different systems with two different displays is really confusing, and the master has to accept that the pilot has better access to higher quality data. When we have the S-100 ECDIS and the pilot and the master are looking at the same image, that will really help to improve things. And I think that's really important to understand. Now, we've also, as part of our trialing and testing, been looking at the S-104 data and the S-111 surface currents. And one of the things that the pilots really said was beneficial was when they were doing the master-pilot exchange at the berth, they hadn't had very much time with the master to explain the maneuvers, and it's always a really pressured time for them to perform that interaction. So having a digital system where they could show what the conditions of the river were like at any particular given time was really beneficial. So the master and the pilot were sharing the same mental image. They understood what the rate of the flow was going to be like in the river at the particular time of departure. They could see the eddies, they could see the slack water, they could see where it was going to be a fast-flowing river, and this really helped them to make sure the maneuvers that they were going to be performing would be performed in a safe way and will help to ensure that the vessel leaves safely on time with no incidents or issues. So you can see that there's lots of benefits for using the new S-100 data in the port environment, and having all of that combined together will really truly help with operational advantages for shipping companies.
Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot. It's pretty clear the benefits that can present. But whilst additional data layers enhance precision, one concern from previous discussions that we've had in Sea Asia and other countries that we've been in is that mariners may feel overwhelmed by multiple data layers. So perhaps you can share an example of dynamic underkeel clearance demonstrating different data layers being operational.
Yeah, thanks, Sky. collaboration with our trial partners has really been key, actually, in testing all of this S-100 data. And what you can see on the screen at the moment is a video of where we've been working with one of our OEM partners, 7Cs, to be able to integrate together all of the S-101 data, the S-102 data, and the S-104 data into a seamless display. And what's happening on the screen at the moment is, as the tide goes in and out, the safety contour is actually changing based on the tidal range at that given time, and that's what's changing over time in the image that you can see. And this is the combination of all of those three data sets together. But you're not overloaded with information. In actual fact, you have a very clear picture of what's happening at that given time. And this is important to understand, is that even though there are three data sets on the screen, you're not being overloaded with information. You're just seeing a contour go in and out. And for us, actually, what's more important is to understand how the user knows that that process is actually taking place and that they're using that dynamic data. So we'll be testing that in our projects that we've got, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I think it's important to just talk about the surface currents as well. And this is really a simple overlay that will be able to be toggled on and off. So even though that information may be used a lot in passage planning, it doesn't have to be on screen at all times. And I think that's really important to make clear to maybe end users and shipping companies, is that these things can be, don't have to be on the screen at all times. But one of the advantages of having access to this data is that it will allow people, when they're building it into their back of bridge systems or using it on the front of bridge, to take advantage of the streams and currents that they're seeing. And actually, it may contribute in some small way to decarbonisation goals. Because if you're using the current and you're using the tidal streams, then actually it may mean that you can steam slower to a port, saving fuel and therefore saving yourself money.
Yeah, thanks. Really, really good points. I mean, whilst we always speak about S-100 in a navigational context, because we're a hydrographic office, and but there was a discussion at Sea Asia around S-100 being beyond just navigation. Particularly important in Singapore, where the port is so crucial to the economy and people's livelihoods. Parry spoke about the broader application of S-100 in maritime decision-making.
It is not only about port efficiency we are talking about now. We are talking about marine environment, protecting the marine environment. We are talking about food security. We are talking about climate change. And as you know, and you're talking about the different standards, not only the S-100, the S-200, the S-400, and so on and so forth. There will be all integrated information. I'm also working on the marine geospatial. And if you look at, let's say, when a pollution happens, marine pollution, the base chart of the electronic chart has to be there. Then what has to be superimposed on it will be the currents and the tides. Not only that, we are looking at the wind as well. So it's sea, land, and air, the integration of all those components. If we look at, let's say, for example, so why do you worry about marine pollution? Because there are sensitive areas like water intake, not only for salination plant, your marine protected areas, also your power plants in terms of cooling. So when a marine pollution happens, all this information is activated. For those who have been here for the last 6 months or so, there has been numerous occasions of marine pollution. So it's not only the Maritime Port Authorities that is involved. You have got the National Environment Agency, you have got the land authorities, and we were using not only information on land, but also drones as well. So it's all the components of three, land, sea, and air, that makes us more conscious of the marine environment.
Yeah, and as always, some really good points from Parry. I mean, interoperability is crucial. S-100 will evolve to include a range of data types across land, sea and air, as Parry said. It's particularly important, Tom, when multiple organisations are involved in decision-making. And do you want to touch on how that came up at Sea Asia?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that S-100 is not static. It's not like S-57 that was frozen. It's been designed to be extensible, and it will evolve as technological advancements happen, but also it may be that new organisations want to come and use that infrastructure. I think it's important to stress that the framework isn't just being used by hydrographic offices and the IHO. The IMO have actually designated S-100 as the data framework which must be used to describe their e-navigation maritime services. And there are other multiple organisations which are using the framework. Now, at other conferences we've been to, there's been some confusion over what does S-200 mean, what does S-500 mean, will it interfere with my S-100? And I think we need to just spend a little bit of time unpacking that. What we have is something called the IHO registry, and it's here that we store all of the information necessary to be able to build our product specifications. So we'll have in the registry all of your features and your attributes and your enumerations that go up to build your ENCs and your bathymetric surfaces and stuff like that. And within there, we have things called domains, and the S-100 domain is owned by the IHO. So any S1XX product specifications that are built, like S-102 or S-104, are owned by the IHO. But then we have another domain, S-200, and that's owned by IALA. So any of the 200 series that you see will be owned by them. The S-500 series is owned by Defence, and S-400 is owned by a range of different organisations like the World Meteorological Organisation and the International Electrotechnical Commission. They are currently building product specifications, and some of the people who have logged on today may have heard of S-421. That's the route information that will be used for ship-to-shore exchange of route information and shore-to-ship. And it's important to say that actually this framework can evolve and continue to evolve as more organisations come to see the value in S-100 and want to use a common framework. Because if everyone's using that common framework, like Parry said, that interoperability is going to be key for making decisions. And that really will help us to unlock much more value in all the different data sets if we're using that common framework and have systems that can integrate all of that data together. It will only help to improve our decision making.
Yeah, and thanks for explaining that. As we've said, it's a common question that comes up, so hopefully that's helped those watching. But finally, before we come to questions from those watching, the audiences at Sea Asia were really interested in the practical implementation, and it's those questions we had in other locations as well. The most common question being around S-100 ECDIS. Can you just break down the timelines and discuss how we're working with ECDIS manufacturers? Yeah,
so I think it's important for everyone to understand that these dates that we're going to talk about now come from the IMO's S-100 ECDIS performance standard. So in there, it said from the 1st of January 2026, it would be permissible for shipping companies to fit S-100 ECDIS on board their vessels and start using any S-100 data that was available. But then from the 1st of January 2029, what the IMO intend to do is retire the old S-57 performance standard. So that will come out of service, and then what that means is that from that date moving forward, if there are any new systems that need to be fitted on board a vessel, or any retrofits that need to happen, then they will only be able to fit those S-100 ECDIS systems. Now, it doesn't mean that the current systems that are in use today will go out of service. There's no requirement on people at the moment to retrofit their systems and fit S-100 ECDIS. So we'll continue to produce our S-57 data alongside our S-100 data for some time to come. Now, it's worth also probably stressing that the new S-100 ECDIS systems are dual fuel systems. And what this means is that they must display both S-57 data alongside all of the S-100 products that we're producing. And obviously with new systems using a lot of new data, we need to make sure that they are capable of doing that in a safe and secure way. So the UKHO have partnered with the French Hydrographic Office, CHOM, to embark in a project where we're creating all of that phase 1 S-100 data across a trial area through the Channel Islands and over to St. Malo. And the reason we chose that area is because there's lots of different boundary crossings. And this is to challenge ourselves in our data production, but also to look at how the data will interact in a new S-100 ECDIS system. So we're going to be conducting lots of shore-based trialing, using simulators and doing some sea trials with this data to really understand where all the benefits come from the S-100 information. But early on, we've actually been working with the ECDIS manufacturers to test this information, and we've already started to feed back into the IHO standardization process improvements where we think some of the standards need to be evolved to actually be fit for purpose. So the project's already starting to see some dividends, and we'll continue to feed that information back into the IHO, and our results will be made available as and when we've done the testing.
That's great. I mean, you know, another example of how collaboration is so important to bring this to life, and it's great that feedback loop for the user experience is central to it. So thanks for answering all my questions. What we're going to do now is just go to the questions that have been put to us by those who have dialed in today.
So yeah, great. Tom, it's great to see, and thanks to everyone, the questions coming in. Just to remind you to submit the questions via the Ask a Question box, and be sure to upvote the question so we can prioritise the ones that are most important to you. You do have the option to like a question with the thumbs up. That is different to upvoting. It's the upvoting that will prioritise the question. So Tom, we better get going because there's quite a few questions. The first one is around actually one question that we've been frequently asked before at other seminars, around what are the connectivity requirements and expected data sizes for the new S-100 product specifications?
Okay, I think that's a really good question, one, like you said, that's come up a few times. With the S-101 data sets, the file size has increased from 5 megabytes previously to 10 megabytes. And the new S-102 data sets also have a similar file size. But it's important, I think, to stress that whilst they are bigger limits, we don't necessarily expect that each file will meet the maximum requirements for the actual file itself. We have done a lot of testing around data transmissions using low Earth orbit satellites. We actually had a project with OneWeb looking at how we would distribute the AVCS dataset, which is approximately 20,000 ENCs across that infrastructure, and it roughly equates to about 6 gigabytes of information. And that was instantaneous. It really is very, very quick over that new infrastructure. And it's important, I think, to understand that whilst we're talking about the new S-100 data sets, we don't expect that there's going to be global coverage of S-102 or S-104 potentially, because it's really the use of those data sets comes in the very shallow areas or constrained waterways. So these are the areas where we're going to be producing data in the port environment and in the approaches to those ports. So you could expect that rather than 20,000 S-102 ENCs, you may have just a quarter of that. So we're not going to expect, on day one that we'll have an explosion of data that needs to be transferred to a vessel. I really think it will be a gradual ramp up of information that will be necessary. A lot of the other data sets aren't as rich in information that needs to be transferred. For example, S-124, the radio navigational warnings, the navigational warnings, would be just a very small package of information that would be broadcast to the vessel. So even though you're talking about another data set, it's not necessarily going to be a really large file that we're transferring. So I don't think that really these file sizes are going to be so much of an issue if vessels have invested in low Earth orbit satellite connectivity.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Really clear. The second question is it possible for third parties to provide their own S-100 framework-based data products? And how will these be made available and kept up to date?
I think a similar question came up this morning, actually.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Where people were really interested to know if the infrastructure could be used to be able to build their own proprietary data sets. And I think the simple answer is yes, it can be. The way that S-100 ECDIS have been designed is that, and S-100 systems in general have been designed, is that they are able to take what's called feature catalogues and portrayal catalogues, which are machine-readable catalogues which can be fed into the ECDIS systems or your ECS, and they can automatically be ingested so that the system knows what features are coming in the new data product, and it knows how those features should then be displayed on the screen for the end user. And these feature and portrayal catalogues can be sent as data updates. The idea being that the system loads them in, and then when the new product is built and sent to the system, it should automatically already understand that product and be able to display that on the screen for the end user. Probably more of a issue for ECDIS systems is that in order to be able to do that, you have to have the graphical user interface configured to allow that to happen. So it's probably less likely that in the first generation S-100 ECDIS that they're going to have capacity to take new proprietary products that they don't expect are coming, because they won't necessarily have built the capability to take that new proprietary data set. But in the unregulated space, where ECS manufacturers may be serving a particular market, dive vessels or whatever, then there is definitely the potential to build proprietary layers from the S-100 infrastructure that will be interoperable with the other data products, S-100 data products, and can be used in these systems without any sort of regulation at all.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think that kind of leads into the next question, actually, which is the next most popular one. Was OEMs seem to be slow in implementing support for S-100 products in their systems? And then the second part is this going to affect the IHO's timeline for the rollout?
So I think it's important to understand that to be able to build an S-100 ECDIS or a display system, the manufacturer needs all of the necessary specifications to do so. And the IHO have now finalised their main product specifications. All the phase 1 product specifications are finalised and published. So hydrographic officers can still start producing natively all of that new S-100 data. But there are still some standards that are in development and haven't completely finalised yet. So we have S-98, which is really all the rules around the interoperability of all of those layers. And that's still yet to go through the final publication phase. And to support that, there are a series of data sets that will be used in type approval testing to be able to check, to make sure that the ECDIS systems were complying with all the rules in the new IMO ECDIS performance standard. And that, again, hasn't yet been finalised. So there are a few things that the IHO need to deliver in order for the next phase to be able to complete, which is the building of the testing standard, IEC 61174. Now, that needs to be published so that the manufacturers can take their systems through the process of type approval to eventually get them onto the market. So there's a lot of things that need to happen in order to get a type-approved ECDIS system. And we've been working with ECDIS manufacturers on the trial projects that I talked about earlier on. We've been working with 7 Seas and Navtor, OSI and Fruno. And 2 of those, both 7 Seas and Navtor, build what's called an ECDIS kernel. And they are going to be selling their ECDIS kernel to other ECDIS manufacturers. So it may be that the manufacturers that they're talking about probably being slow to adopt the S-100 infrastructure or whatever are actually, instead of building their own display capability for S-100, they may be choosing to use a kernel from a manufacturer. So this may be some of the reason why they think there's a slow uptake of the S-100 infrastructure by their particular manufacturer. It may just be that they're waiting for that type-approved kernel before they can then implement that in their ECDIS system. So you can see that there are some reasons why it may be perceived that there's a slowness by OEMs to adopt, the infrastructure. But I don't really think it's necessarily they're a problem of their own doing. I think that it's just, it's taken some time.
Process.
Yeah, it's taken some time for the IHO standards to progress, and so the 1st of January 2026 is an ambitious target, I think, for us to be able to have a fully type-approved ECDIS in the market by that date. But we'll just have to see what happens, I think.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the next question is around how will weather information be integrated?
So, as we talked about earlier on, the S-400 domain has product specifications from the World Meteorological Organization within that. And one of the specifications that they're developing at the moment is S-412, which is the weather warnings. And this is, I think, in this is in edition 1 at the moment, so it's not operational, and no one's at the moment building any operational data, but it is available for testing purposes. And because they're using the S-100 infrastructure to be able to transfer that information, it will all be interoperable with the other product specifications that are being built at the moment. But clearly, because it's being built by an external organization and the IHO are not in control of the speed at which that develops or in any way sort of related to the building of that product specification, I can't really comment too much on where they are with that.
Okay, thanks. So the next question's, it's quite a long one, but that's fine. So thanks for this question. So whilst I'm reading out to Tom, just a reminder to upvote the questions because there are quite a few building and I want to make sure we get through the ones you want us to get through. So Tom, at IMO NCSR subcommittee this week, NCSR 12, one of the agenda items is the development of guidance to establish a framework for a data distribution and global internet protocol-based connectivity between shore-based facilities and ships for ECDIS S-100 products. Questions were raised around S-124, which contains a subset of maritime safety information, or MSI, namely navigational warnings that can be provided through ECDIS. But there was a concern raised that at present, there's no legal basis for this. A number of delegations stated that in their view, MSI transmissions belong to the GMDSS and it should stay that way. So I'm nearly at the end, sorry. What is the view of the IHO on this? And there was a question about whether participants had a view. So can you pass any comment on that?
So I was actually on Monday up at the IMO building where the IHO and the IMO had convened a meeting of interested stakeholders to discuss some of these issues that are being talked about here. And we had presentations from AMSA, who were very pro using a new protocol called CCOM, which is developed by the IAC for the transfer of this real-time information to vessels. But we also had presentations from industry where they offered a different view, where we could potentially use the current infrastructure to be able to deliver that real-time information to vessels. So I think there's going to be some really interesting discussions over these next 2 weeks at NCSR, and clearly there hasn't been any decision made yet. And again, at the IHO, no decision has been made as to whether or not they would support the development of infrastructure to support the delivery of a marine connectivity platform or to support CCOMs.
Yeah, thanks. The next question is, what is the data source for S-104 surface current info?
Okay, so we've currently got 2 different sources for that information at the moment, which are under test. Part of the learning process, I suppose, with any of this new data products is for hydrographic offices to understand what best meets the needs of the end user. So the UKHO are looking at testing and trialing a number of different S-104 products. We will start off by using the harmonic information that we've got to produce a set of predicted information in the S-104 data sets. But then we have a hybrid model, if you like, where we've combined some of the predicted information with weather information to see how well that works in the trial areas. And we're also looking at actual tidal models that we've had built under contract that include forecast information, so bringing in weather information and having a proper hydrodynamic model built that will help us to predict what the tides are going to be like in that trial area. So we haven't really stuck on a methodology that we'll use to produce that at the moment, because clearly there are various ways in which you can meet that need, but we need to really understand ourselves which best meets the needs of the end user.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just to keep going, because there's some good questions here. How about those countries that are not covered by the UKHO, like Uruguay and some areas in Argentina? Will they also be covered by S-100?
I think it's important to understand that there are different capabilities in different hydrographic offices, but the IHO have something called the Capacity Building Fund, which aims to help hydrographic offices in gaining the skills and capacity necessary to support them in producing the products necessary for safe navigation in their waters. So I think it will be incumbent on the IHO to work with those nations to help them have the right skills and capacity necessary to build up that S-100 capability to be in a position to produce those products. And what we're doing at the IHO is looking at producing guidance for them on terms of which areas to start production on first, because it's no good clearly producing S-100 data in areas that are hardly ever visited by traffic. We want to concentrate our efforts in the high traffic areas first, make sure that we're covering the top 2,000 ports and work backwards from there, really, because that will help hopefully with the adoption of S-100 ECDIS and make sure that actually the top routes, the top trading routes are being covered sufficiently with the data necessary to safely navigate between ports.
Okay, thanks. But the audience at Sea Asia and other places that we go wanted to know what impact S-100 will have on training requirements for mariners. Always a popular discussion point. So what can you share on that?
So it's something that the UKHO have been discussing with our own National Maritime Administration, the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, and we've been talking to them about what we think is necessary in terms of training and what's happening at STCW to address some of those concerns. I think that the shift to S-100 is quite a big one, and mariners need to understand the new data sets and how they will potentially support them in safer navigation, but they need to know how those data sets work in the new systems. So I do think there is some form of training need. What that ends up being and what that will be in the future, I'm not necessarily sure for definite in terms of what it will be. But clearly it's something that we're going to be exploring further as we go through this journey.
And just bear with me a second. When we were in Sea Asia, actually something that came up that was discussed quite at length was around bunkering. And I think that was a really important discussion, and it's probably worth sharing that here.
Yeah, sure. So Parry touched on it earlier, I think, in that video where he said that the marine pollution was a real problem for Singapore. It was something they were really concerned about, and they needed to make sure that bunkering operations happened in a way which didn't affect the marine environment. And so what we can see is that actually having access to all the S-100 data sets will support vessels when they're doing their safety cases, because if they have access to the S-102, they have access to the S-104, they'll know they have access to the S-111, they will know where the tidal streams are coming from, they'll know which way the vessels doing the bunkering should approach from. They can do some very sophisticated planning so that they don't encounter any issues with any of that, things that may cause marine pollution. And I think that's a really good use case for S-100 data that we hadn't necessarily considered when we were looking at all of the benefits of having access to that information. But clearly, from a procedural point of view, it makes sense that actually if you've got access to better, high-quality information all in a common framework and bringing that together, it will help you with your operations to make sure the decisions you are making are correct and won't cause any unintended consequences like marine pollution, which clearly is a disaster in an area that's so sensitive like Singapore.
And there was a question here, and it came up again at CASIA as well. Somebody's got an S-57 ECDIS. How realistic and easy is it for them to fit an S-100 ECDIS? And how long is that going to take? Does the current ECDIS, will it be able to dual fuel the same information? Will those ECDIS in the future be able to dual fuel?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And we've heard this before from some of the ECDIS manufacturers. What they've said is that if they're fitting new systems today, they will fit hardware on board that far exceeds the needs of the users of S-57 charts. And the reason for doing that is they're essentially future-proofing those boxes to go on board now, so that when S-100 becomes a reality, the hardware will have the capability to run all of the new software out of the box, essentially, which will mean they won't need to go and rip out the hardware and put a new box in. So if anyone needs to fit new ECDIS systems today, then clearly they're going to be able to do that. And what it will mean is I would really advise them to start having those discussions with their ECDIS manufacturers to say, are you putting on something that actually I can use with S-100 in the future, because that will obviously save yourself money and time overall. I think the other point you made around dual fuel is that these new S-100 ECDIS systems will be capable of running S-57 and S-101, and all of those S-100 products. So even though hydrographic offices may not be producing S-101 data on day one, they will have the ability to use the S-57 data and the S-101 data in combination for a long period of time. So no worries there.
But on that point, how ready are hydrographic offices for the provision of S-100 data?
So I think we're at the really early stages, Guy. We've moved from the theoretical development of standards through to their implementation now. We're just at the cusp of hydrographic offices being able to produce the data in accordance with the new standards. The production systems are being delivered to hydrographic offices in order to enable us to be able to produce that data. So clearly, we can now start to trial and test all of that information. And Canada have set up an international trial test bed where they'll be making all of the phase 1 data that they've produced available for trialling and testing later on this year. UKHO will be doing the same thing with our data partners, SHOM. We will be setting up an international trial test bed where we'll be making all of that data that we've produced for the channel available for other interested parties to come and test and trial. So there are hydrographic offices that are, at the point of delivering data and starting to test and understand, because we want to know that the products that we're producing will meet the user needs. We want to know if there are any errors in the product specifications that we've built, because if we find out that, we can build back into the IHO standards and look to improve them and make sure that they are fit for purpose, because that's really what we want. We want to be able to deliver new products to end users that's going to meet some of the challenges that they've got today, support them with decarbonisation, support them with all of the challenges that they've got. Hopefully not have any of the cyber attacks as well that we've been hearing a lot about recently. I think that's a concern for lots and lots of shipping companies, and they'll want to know that the data they're putting into their ECDIS systems is secure and comes from a secure source. So the IHO have done a lot in that space to make sure that the information that is going into the vessels will be from the producer that has produced that information. All of the data that is being produced in S-100 will have a digital signature assigned to it, and what this will mean is that that information can be authenticated all the way through to the end user system. So it will help to ensure that the data that was sent from the producer has got to the end system in the way that it was intended. So clearly that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, okay. So as a final question for you, Tom, if there was one thing that you wanted the audience to take away from this webinar, we've had some really good questions. Before we bring it to a close, what's your final message? What would it be?
I think for me, collaboration is key. You can clearly see that there's a lot of trialling and testing that's going to be done over the next couple of years, but I think working together, we can share the benefits of the S-100 framework and really bring benefits to the end user using these new data products.
Right, nice. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for your questions today. If we didn't manage to get to yours, please keep an eye on the Admiralty website, where we'll be posting plenty of content on the topics covered in today's session. But before we wrap up, I just want to extend a huge thank you to you for joining us. It's really your participation and feedback that makes events like this possible. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill out a quick survey to share your thoughts on today's webinar. But I think importantly, let us know what topics you would like us to explore in the future. You can access that survey by scanning the QR code on your screen now, or by clicking the link that's just been posted in the Q&A panel. Tom and I hope you found today's discussions really valuable as we work together towards the future of navigation. But thank you very much again for being part of this event.